What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast. Katie Mox and Will Brinson here. And welcome back to our All 32 series, the series where we catch up with insiders and give you all the information that you need to know for every single NFL team. Today, we are diving into the Dallas Cowboys, Dem Boys, with NFL staff writer for CBS Sports and Cowboys insider Garrett Podell. Garrett, thank you for joining us today. How you doing?
I'm doing phenomenal, Katie. Thank you so much for having me. And it's the off season when we're talking about the Cowboys. I'm just kidding. We talk about the Cowboys all the time. All the time.
I go back and forth here, and I'm like, man, I'm so sick of talking about the Cowboys. And then I'm like, but God, it's so entertaining. Like, I think I've referenced Mike McCarthy's decision to come out publicly and say, Kellen's trying to light the scoreboard. I'm trying to run the damn ball and get my defense off the field like 40 times in the last couple of months because it's literally insane. He is suggesting that he wants to score less points with that comment, which I don't know if you guys are aware, you need points to win games. And less points, bad.
It's interesting because in his tenure, they were the second highest scoring offense in the NFL behind only Patrick Mahomes' Chiefs from 2019 to 2022. So it's not like the offense is broken. It's more of just situationally and fundamentally, foundationally, with Dak Prescott's footwork tied to interceptions, a few things like that, some red zone stuff, some third down stuff that they want to tighten up. But Brian Schottenheimer told me at minicamp at the end.
By the way, Brian Schottenheimer, you are now in an exclusive club with Brian Schottenheimer, friends of the podcast.
Oh, really?
He's been on the podcast. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, and he was
Great
talking
guy.
about at the end of minicamp. Oh, so fun. He was mentioning how it's called the Texas Coast offense because Mike McCarthy's roots, West Coast offense, as Aaron Rodgers would talk about in Green Bay, point and shoot. Rodgers calls it the most beautiful offense in football. But what they want to do in Dallas is tighten things up with Prescott and specifically his footwork. The biggest thing they're working on with him is his dropbacks, timing, his throws with his foundational movements in the pocket. Something that Schottenheimer, friend of the program, mentioned was something he really had to drill down with Brett. Coordinator.
You're back.
With the New York Jets. Oh, am I here?
I think Billy may have been. Yeah. You're fine. You keep going. You're good. Yeah.
So Schottenheimer said story time with Schotty. Brett Favre, when he coached him with the New York Jets, Brett loved to squeeze the football in there. He said the biggest thing is just making sure with the timing of the throws that the chances and opportunities are right for Dak to make the throws. And I think Brandon Cooks will be very key as well in reducing what you see there as the worst interception rate in football last season.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. Dak Prescott, leading, 15 interceptions last year. And to Brinson's point, McCarthy has really scapegoated Kellen Moore here, blaming him for everything. What do you think that this offense is going to look like without Moore?
I mean, a big complaint with the offense is it could get predictable in some third down situations. They were really successful. They were a top 5 conversion offense in third downs, but a lot of people love to show the curl routes, specifically the 49ers playoff game that ended their season out in Santa Clara. Katie pumping her fist, of course.
Hell yeah.
There was an interception on a curl route in which he tried to hit Michael Gallup. It was tipped, interception, same deal on a shorter route with CeeDee Lamb. And so I think what you have there is different route combinations, and a lot of McCarthy's system in Green Bay was predicated on receivers winning their routes and a variety of different routes. So I think just a little diversification of the different types of plays you're going to run there. And then also an even bigger emphasis, not just on running the ball, Brinson, which you mentioned, but pass protection with their running back. Schottenheimer hit on that 2-3 times when I last spoke with him at minicamp. So involving running backs a little bit more in the blocking game to help Dak have a little bit more time to throw.
With that in mind, do you think are they really done with this running back room? Jerry Jones loves some Zeke Elliott, man. And eventually they're going to get to training camp and Zeke's going to be unsigned. Zeke is still unsigned, right? I feel like
he's on the open.
Yeah. I knew that. I was like, but it's just crazy. It's like Zeke, Dalvin, DeAndre Hopkins. This is how it works. And people are always surprised. They're like, why have they found a home? It's like, they don't want to work out. They don't want to practice if they don't have to. They're veterans. They don't need to. And teams don't want to overpay for them. And they want to see what they need down the road. I guess I'm wondering, do you think they're done with this running back room, or could we see somebody like a Dalvin, somebody like a Zeke added later?
I think they're done if Ezekiel Elliott's asking price, whatever it is, doesn't go down. Because Jerry and Steven both talked about at the Senior Bowl in February, we love Zeke and this and that. But Tony Pollard, as you see there, Zeke was last in yards per touch last season. Tony Pollard was first. And Zeke had 16 more carries than Tony last year. So they've made it clear Tony is the lead back. Lead back is the phrase Mike McCarthy has used over and over this offseason. But I think they're done unless Zeke decides to take backup running back money, which could be difficult for him because he was the highest paid running back on his $90 million contract the last few seasons.
Well, let's say that Zeke, is done, and then there's a lot on Tony Pollard. Then can he carry the full workload in the backfield? I'm looking right now at some fantasy projections saying he's the second best running back to take in your drafts. His over-under, I believe, is at 1,200 rushing yards. How productive do you think that Tony Pollard could be? Is this someone we should look at for fantasy to take pretty high in our drafts? And certainly his over-under at 1,200.
Katie, I would hammer Tony Pollard in your fantasy drafts because not only with the rushing, but the receiving, he's really shifty, really elusive, has great hands out of the backfield. One game that just immediately comes to mind is the Minnesota Vikings game in which they won 40-3 last year. Pollard had, I think, multiple touchdowns, 50, 60 yards. He had a 57-yard touchdown run against the Rams, and that's when Aaron Donald was healthy. I think he can. Now, he did have a freak injury at the end of the season against the 49ers. He had the foot injury, but off the tightrope procedure, he said he feels faster. He's ramped up his training. It's more aggressive than he's ever been before. So he's very much training as if he's going to be the undisputed number one back. And I think it's a great play for fantasy because behind him, you've Deuce Vaughn, who's more of a gadget guy at his size, around 5'6", that they took out at the end of the draft from Kansas State. And then Ronald Jones is more of a flyer at this point after
Rojo feels like he might be like maybe on the roster, right? I mean,
I think it's going to be between him and Malik Davis, an undrafted running back who's been on the team the last couple of years.
Malik Davis has like had some moments last year.
Yeah, so that's competition for the RB3 spot. I don't think Malik Davis and Rojo are on the roster next year. So that makes it tough for the Zeke idea too, where it's like you've got this group of this running back room that you like, and it's sort of like this. Why do I keep making Seinfeld references like people like people actually? But it's like George is like, we're breaking up, and she's like, no. He's like it's into a nuclear warhead. Like, turn your key, like, lady. Like, and Zeke's like, no, I think I'm going to be a Cowboy. It's just a matter of when Jerry caves. With that running back room, maybe it won't be the case. The wide receivers, and this is what I don't get. You go get Brandon Cooks in a trade. You have CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup, and obviously they let Amari Cooper, traded Amari Cooper away last year. But it's like, I mean, they've got some pretty stout investments in their wide receiver room, and they're like, we're gonna run the ball more. Like, I don't know, like, it feels like a waste to run the ball a ton with those three wide receivers. I think that's more lip service. I think Mike McCarthy, he's an old school football coach.
Yeah.
So he's going to say that, but what that really means, in my opinion, is get ahead of the sticks on first down. And that might not necessarily be by running. Maybe that's a dump down to Tony Pollard. Or now that Brandon Cooks is there, I think you see a lot of involvement from him in the intermediate and deeper parts of the field. And I think what Cooks does more than anything else is allow CeeDee Lamb to kind of hang out in the slot, where he was far and away the best slot receiver in terms of his catches, yards in that area. And Cooks, even though he's under 6 feet, his best spot is on the outside, which I think brings a lot of balance to the Cowboys offense. So I think the Cooks addition, in terms of allowing CD to play where he likes to play, and then also being a great resource for guys like Michael Gallup, who, to your point, Brinson, they invested a ton of money in 5 years, about $62.5 million, as well as Jalen Tolbert, who was their third round pick.
Oh yeah. I love Jalen Tolbert at South Alabama.
Shoddy, our friend of the program, to bring him up one more time, he mentioned the biggest part of the Cooks investment in his eyes has been what he's done with Tolbert. He said Tolbert's basically been attached to Cooks' hip all throughout minicamp, And so they're expecting to see a nice little jump from him and maybe the wide receiver 3-4 spot along with Gallup.
All right, looking at the defense, Garrett, particularly the secondary, you have Diggs already, right? Now you got Gilmore. They're the only team that have 2 top 10, according to PFF, cornerbacks on the same team. How explosive and how many picks do you think we're going to see in the secondary?
I think the Gilmore addition isn't necessarily about picks, because Trayvon Diggs, when he led the league in picks a couple years ago, he also led the league in receiving yards allowed. So, a really boomer bust kind of corner. I think the biggest area that Diggs is going to grow from having Stephon Gilmore next to him is just his fundamentals and being able to be a much better man coverage defender. The Cowboys were a top 3 zone defense last year in terms of pass rating allowed. Really awful in man. They're actually second worst. So I think what Gilmore does as a former defensive player of the year is help refine everybody in that room's technique and bring them into a more cohesive unit as a man coverage defense.
Love it.
Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, Cowboys offensive line, long heralded as one of the best ever, but has it fallen off a cliff? Garrett will tell us next. So the Cowboys, Tyron Smith's still there. Tyler Smith, they drafted in the first round last year. I know how to pronounce it. I never pronounce Piazza's name correctly.
Bjanic,
yeah. I know how to pronounce it because I would always talk about it in the draft, and then I see it written down. I'm like, bah! And
a classic Wisconsin offensive lineman.
Correct. It's the dude from Wisconsin. And then Hall of Famer Zach Martin's there, and I guess Terrence Steele's going to be the right tackle. Is that what we're looking at right now? And this is the thing with the Cowboys to me, and this is true for a lot of NFL teams. If something Tyron Smith was drafted in 2011. If you're a 30-year-old, you graduated would you graduate high school in 2011? I don't even know. I don't even want to do the math because I'm going to get nauseous. But the point being is that he is older. Zach Martin was drafted in 2014. It feels. Do you think this offensive line is a little fragile? That's just sort of what I'm getting at. That feels like the linchpin. It's the same for a lot of NFL teams, but if you pull out one piece of that offensive line, it could go kaboom.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the Tyron Smith one is really valid. He had a neck injury that caused him to miss a lot of time in the past couple of years, and he's on the wrong side of 30, 32, 33. So I think with him, it's difficult because, like you said, in 2011, I think Dynamite by Taio Cruz was the top song back then. And, I have not heard about Taio Cruz in years. So just a time capsule reference to how long ago he was drafted into the NFL. But Zach Martin.
I was talking with somebody about a time capsule earlier, too. For some reason. I can't remember why.
A lot of time capsules.
We're on the same
on.
wavelength.
Taio Cruz. Wow. That is a blast from the past. Good song.
Yeah.
Good performer.
Very catchy. Very catchy.
2011, just to be clear, Tyron Smith, when he was drafted in 2011, that was my first year at CBS. That was my first draft covering for CBS. That's how long ago it was.
Yeah, and I think Zach Martin, he's about as sturdy as it gets, and physically standing by him at his locker after minicamp, whatever. He looks the same. I don't really have much concern about him, but I think the real concern is if a Tyron Smith injury happens, they would kick Tyler Smith out to left tackle, and that's where he played a little bit when Tyron was coming back from his neck injury. But to your point, the next guys behind them, the depth just isn't there like it was in years past. I think you're right. If everybody's healthy, it's great. But if Tyron Smith has an injury, I don't think it's an LA Rams injury catastrophe where there's absolutely nothing there, but it's not great, the depth. But if everyone stays healthy, I think they're still top 5 unit.
All right, Garrett, we're going to ask you some gambling questions, some futures on the Cowboys. But before we do, we would be remiss not to ask you about this Jerry Jones documentary that it was going to be on Netflix. There was a bidding war, $50 million. Fans will get to relive the glory days of Jerry Jones. What should we expect?
I think you should expect a lot of the 1990s because the Cowboys are currently on a run of 12 consecutive playoff appearances without a conference title game, which is the longest such streak in league history. So a lot of 90s.
The playoff, but they're like fourth or fifth in the NFL in terms of longest drought of conference playoff appearances. Or championship appearances. That's insane. It's like the Lions and the Browns and the Jets, or the Jets actually have one too. Yeah,
Yeah, it's Washington, Detroit, the Browns,
the
model franchises in the
yeah,
NFL.
right.
I think there's going to be a lot of that. Jerry Jones is in the Hall of Fame on the back of the 90s championships, but also what he's done for the league, growing the game. So I think he's mastered the ability to make what comes out of his mouth entertainment. Only owner who does post-game press conferences in the same way that a head coach does. So I think you're going to see a lot of Jerryisms, which are his long-winded metaphors that after you hear him, you go, does that really make sense?
Circumcising a mosquito? Like, what are we doing here, buddy? Like,
I think
he said that. He said that.
Yes. Oh, he likes insects. I've heard a couple bees ones that I'm like, are you sure?
The circumcising the mosquito thing actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because it's like, I mean, obviously the parts on a mosquito are not big because a mosquito is small. So it's like a really difficult exercise is what he's trying to say.
Yeah, and I mean, it's clearly you're on.
Katie's like, Jesus, could you please?
He just smiles. He just smiles and laughs and counts his cash, and I think that's going to be exactly what you see in the documentary. He's a marketing guru, marketing genius, and for those who don't like the Cowboys, I think they'll find the same reasons to be annoyed. But if you're a Cowboys fan, I think you'll eat it up.
What do you think about the Cowboys at plus 165 to win the division? The Eagles. See, I feel like this line for the division odds, and I've said for this offseason that we've mentioned that the Eagles have a much tougher schedule. They had the easiest schedule in football last year, now the hardest. The Eagles at minus 105, given their success last year, it's Vegas is essentially saying this is a 2-horse race. Would you rather lay the light juice there with the Eagles or take the plus money with the Cowboys if you were betting on the division?
I would go with the Cowboys for a couple of reasons. One is there has not been a repeat champion in the NFC East since the Eagles in the early Donovan McNabb, Andy Reid days, 2000, 2004, when they won 3 or 4 in a row. And then also, I think the Eagles, they suffered a little attrition along the defensive line. They lost Javon Hargrave to the 49ers, and they're incorporating in some young guys, Jordan Davis, 2 Georgia Bulldogs, and then, of course, Jalen Carter, who they drafted this year in the top 10. So I think there's going to be a little bit of an adjustment period defensively up front for them. And I think the Cowboys are a much better roster than they were last year. As long as everyone stays healthy offensively, I think the Cowboys could be really, really special. I think defensively, they've been top 5 each of the last 3 years.
Yeah, Dan Quinn has done a great job.
Dan Quinn is phenomenal. And I really think that the Cowboys, it's their division to lose, even though the odds would say otherwise. I like the juice on Dallas.
Well, if you think Dallas is a special team, they are 15-1 to win the Super Bowl. If they win the NFC East, it's kind of hard to argue that they aren't going to be at least a contender for the Super Bowl. Is that how special this team is? Or are we not going that far?
I think Dak's always gone that far. Troy Aikman actually in an interview in the last couple of weeks really complimented Dak Prescott and took a shot at Tony Romo by saying Dak's really been the only quarterback post himself to publicly say the Super Bowl is the standard for the Cowboys. So I think
ESPN on CBS Crime.
I think to Aikman's point, Dak is very open about this is what the Cowboys should be doing, competing for Super Bowls. And I think they'll be right there in the mix. I mean, they've been just a couple bad bounces away each of the last 2 postseasons against San Francisco. But I think they're right there. I truly do.
It's hard to get past those Niners.
15, man. That's just, I mean, like I get to see the NFC. There's not many teams in there that they think are going to compete, but like 15 feels a little short for me for a team. By the way, Jay better talk about this in the documentary. In 1996, Jerry Jones, this is like, it's hard to find like actual evidence of this, but I think Michael Silver wrote a story about it. Jerry Jones swears that he prayed to God that Beelzebub that he would Satan, if you will, he made a deal with the devil is what I'm saying. He's like he's like if you give me this title, I'll never ask for another one in my life. And it's like, and then it was like he won it. It's like maybe I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
All right, Dak Prescott, interesting over-unders, 4,025.5 passing yards and 26.5 passing touchdowns. You like the over or the under, knowing what we know about this offense?
I like the over on the touchdown passes. The last healthy season Dak had, 2021, he set the franchise single season record for touchdowns with 37. So I feel pretty good about him eclipsing 26. The yards, not as excited about or comfortable with, because, if we're taking gambling picks, I don't want to lose anybody money potentially. So I could see them really being, I could see them really focusing on the run game to Mike McCarthy's point, or even just the shorter passing game to limit risk. So I don't necessarily know if that equates to over 4,000 yards, but I definitely see the touchdowns figure being very appetizing for potential bettors.
Love it.
All right. Well, you gave us a lot to think on or chew on with these appetizers. Thank you so much to Garrett Podell for joining us. The vibes are high in Dallas, but I will say they're high pretty much every single year. And then something happens in the playoffs. We hope that doesn't happen to you this year, unless of course
you hope it happens to the Niners again, though. Is what you
yeah, we hope it happens with the 49ers again, because that was a lot of fun. Garrett, again, thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned for more from our All 32 series with daily drops in your podcast feed and on YouTube. And make sure you like, comment, and subscribe on this video. And we'll see you for the next one. Garrett, thank you.
Thanks, Garrett.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, man.